So this is what it sounds like before.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind.
And this is what it sounds like mastered.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind. If you take my time, gonna lose your mind.
What's up YouTube and Post fam? Today we're doing an advanced mastering tutorial. Some of you may remember almost 6 years ago, I did a basics mastering tutorial where I showed you guys the basics of mastering and how to do it with FL Studio plugins. You guys loved that video a lot and I promised I would do an advanced one and I never did, but now I will. I am right now. Anyways, I'm gonna show you how I master now from years of experience and learning from other friends. I'm gonna be using some expensive plugins, not gonna lie, but I will also show an alternative way to do the same concepts with free plugins from FL Studio. I'm gonna be using my recent song, Lose Your Mind. I mastered it myself, so I'm gonna show you the actual chain that I did to master it, and my hope is that you guys can learn something and to better master your own music from this. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right guys, here's my project right here. I always master in a separate project because it's way cleaner. There's gonna be no CPU issues, and I can just kind of see everything and just feel free. So I drag my mix in here, I route it to its proper channel. Here's what's going on in my master chain. I'll go through each one of these one by one and tell you what they're doing. This might not be exactly how you end up doing it, but you should be able to learn some techniques that you can apply to your own tracks. First plugin I got going on here is called P42 Climax. I'm gonna put links to all these plugins in the description if you wanna check them out. This one's kind of expensive, but it's the nicest sounding analog distortion that I've ever heard. And it's one of those plugins that is just saturating technically, but somehow through the oversampling or just through whatever harmonics it adds, it just automatically makes things sound better a lot of times for me. So mainly what I use is just the saturation knob. What I like to do first is kind of slam it and see how far it goes before it really distorts.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind. If you take my time.
So it sounds cool, but I obviously don't want it to sound super crushed, so I just kind of find that medium.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind.
Where you're getting a little bit of distortion, but not overly doing it. It also helps with all of the frequencies that go too far that might be hard for the limiter when the limiter comes. This helps kind of cut some of those off early on and leaves more room later for some more compression and limiting. It's got other features too, like an EQ, like a high shelf and low shelf where you can add stuff.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If
I added a tiny bit there, but I generally don't add. It really depends on the track. This one I didn't feel like needed a whole lot of high end. And I generally turn the low end one off because I really care a lot about my low end and I don't want to do too much to it because then it gets muddy, and I liked how it sounded in the mix. I also added a tiny bit of the super high end.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna
just making it a little bit more crispy. Moving on, we have an EQ. Now, this is from UAD Spark, which I really love. They've got so many plugins that I use super often. It's the subscription program, so you don't need an Apollo interface to run them. This one has a lot of cool presets. Sometimes I just go through the presets, find like the mix bus or whatever, and just scroll through a bunch of these until I find one that feels like it's serving the song well. And then I'll go in and make little adjustments that feel good for my own track. This one has a mid-side splitter. So these down here are the sides and these are the mids. Here you have the option to either dip or peak, which is what the knob will do. So here I'm peaking the top end,
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind.
2 dB and only 1 dB here. Not doing anything here. I got 1 dB boost in the sides on the 1K and nothing here. The EQ for every track is going to be completely different, so it really depends on your track, but I've found that the presets can kind of inspire you and you can start hearing some different things that you wouldn't normally hear and then play with it afterwards and kind of find the sweet spot that you like. One pause little note is that I highly suggest finding a track that you like that has a similar sound as yours and find the sonic balance. We'll go more into that later, but find the sonic balance of it and then adjust your EQ likewise. Sometimes it can be easy to put too much high end and then it's super bright, or too much low end or whatever. But if you're referencing another song, you can kind of see and hear the balance that you're gonna want. So adjust this EQ accordingly. Next, we have another UAD X which is the Spark subscription bundle. This thing's super cool. It's just like a really nice compressor, and it's meant for mastering. Again, with all these things, I like to push them too hard and then kind of go back to where I like it. So take the threshold. That might be a little bit too much compression. This thing's pretty subtle, but I think it helps keep everything nice and glued together. And I like a subtle compressor for the master because it's very delicate. You can easily overcompress, easily screw stuff up. So between the output knob kind of pushes it through distortion a little bit. So if you really push that, you get a little bit of distortion. You got a saturator knob here too. Add some gain. You could push that a little bit more too if you want some more distortion, but again, I don't want this to sound too distorted. I just want a little bit to make it just really crunch together and feel really thick. So this has been a go-to compressor for my mastering lately. I've been really loving the UAD stuff. This is also a UAD mic, the Sphere DLX. It's a modeling mic. It's super cool. Definitely check out UAD stuff. Next, we got Sideminder. This is a plugin that my buddy DeCero told me about. He actually taught me a lot about mastering. It's really cool. It's like a limiter for stereo width. So with stereo, you can go too wide to where it sounds phasey and weird, and this will automatically detect it, and if it goes too wide, it'll bring it in a little bit, like a limiter or a compressor. So you can see it working here. So you can make it super wide like this. It can sound cool to make it extremely wide, but you can easily overdo it and then it just sounds phasey and weird. So you want to just kind of listen for making sure it doesn't start to get into the weird territory. But since I did some stereo widening with the EQ, I didn't hit this too hard. I made below 90 hertz all the way mono. I don't always do that because sometimes I want some width in the bass, but with this track, it made sense to make that completely mono. And the idea with that has always been so you don't have phase issues when you play it on big speakers. Next off, we got Pro Q3, which is one of my favorite plugins ever. I got some dynamic EQ, so it's basically compressing this EQ bell right here. And I decided to take a little bit of high end out because as I was listening to my references, analyzing it, I just felt like it could use a little bit less high end. So that's why I took that out. Added a little bit more clarity in the 2K range and took a tiny bit out. Deleted below 19 hertz because you don't really need any information behind there. So this was a pretty subtle EQ. Sometimes I do a little bit more, but this one didn't need a lot. Next, I've got an exciter. So if you solo this, you can hear it adds some transients, and I think what this thing does is adds harmonics on stuff and kind of distorts it a little bit and can sometimes make things just have a little bit more transient, a little bit more punch. So I usually don't go too crazy with this. I keep the mix like 50 or below, and then I'll mess with the amount, and then you can solo each band. You can hear what it's like at an extreme level, but I like to kind of keep it a little bit more subtle. A lot of times I'll start out with a learn thing. I'll click learn and then play it, and then it'll kind of split up the frequencies how the AI decides is best, and then I'll adjust it from there. So that can add just a little bit of excitingness to your master, but I generally don't want to overdo that because just like everything in mastering, you can very easily overdo it. So you want to make sure that you're not doing too much if that's not necessary. Next, we got Fire Maximizer. This is from the boys, United Plugins. I love these plugins. This is just like a limiter slash clipper. So it's a maximizer, and it helps you get a ton of loudness from your track by mixing, limiting, and clipping. You can see here there's like clipping, limiting, saturation, multiband, and you can kind of go between where you like. I went to the EDM preset and then adjusted it likewise. If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose. And then with the drive knob, it adds volume and then it can make it more distorted. So if you push it, if you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, that's way too much. But if you find the happy medium, then you get some nice loudness that's pretty undetectable. Also here, there's oversampling. And if I turn it off, if I do A, B with and without it, this is without it. If you take my time, gonna lose. And with it. If you take my time, gonna lose your. I'll do that a couple times so you can hear the difference. If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind. If you take my time, gonna lose your. So if you listen really carefully, you'll hear some more detailed high end. And oversampling, it's a very complicated thing. I don't fully understand it, but it just does some tricky stuff to clarify frequencies. Oftentimes 8x oversampling can make stuff sound better, but ultimately you just want to play around with it and find what sounds good. Sometimes 8x is too much and it'll make it too bright, but for this track it really sounded great, so I just ran with it. And finally we have Pro L.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose.
This plugin is incredible. I love it. I love all the FabFilter stuff. It's so incredible. They're some of my favorite mixing plugins. This is also a huge Skrillex favorite. I know that he loves Pro L. So I actually went to the presets and went to the EDM, aggressive and tight. I experimented with some different presets, and this is one that I landed on that I liked.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose.
You kind of just set the level to where, again, where you push it too much and you can hear that it's pumping too much or distorting too much and ruining the sound. You obviously want to bring it back, but you also want it to be super loud, especially for EDM. You can make the call how loud you want it, but I generally like to keep it at around -7 LUFs, and I'll show you the meter in a second. You can push this up.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind. If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. Gonna lose my mind. Gonna lose your mind. Yeah. Take my time, gonna.
And after listening a ton, I settled on just +5 dB because it got it to the range that I wanted it, and it didn't sound too overcompressed and too distorted. To be honest, I still don't know as much as I want to about the attack and release and look ahead and stuff. I want to look into it more so I understand it, but that kind of goes to show you don't have to be a super huge professional to master. You kind of just have to have a good enough ear, mess around and enjoy the process and just like experiment to what sounds good. There's definitely a ton of value to learning the super specifics, and I want to do more of that. If you don't know all that stuff, it's okay. You can still make great masters. One technique if you want to try to explore different knobs is to just absolutely smash something and then mess with it.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind. If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. Gonna lose my mind. Gonna lose your mind. Gonna take my time.
As you can hear, the attack's smaller, makes it more limited and less distorted and quieter, and then when you bring it up, it's more distorted. So you can go extreme and then find the balance that you want and then bring it back to a normal level where it's gonna sound transparent. I also forgot to mention that I had oversampling on 8x on this as well, which seems kind of crazy to do that 2 times, but it's one of those things where it's like, it may not make sense, but it sounds good. So I'm just gonna roll with it. So this is a plugin that I use a ton with mastering. It's called Uline Loudness Meter 2, and it's free, as you can see. So definitely check that out. But you can see how loud it gets.
Take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose my mind.
So as you can see, it's -7.2, kind of at the loudest parts. I think at some point it even gets to -6.9, which is always a win for me personally. If it can sound good and get into the -6s sometimes. I love a good loud master as long as it's not squashed and sounding terrible. This is a really helpful tool to kind of gauge where your track is compared to other tracks. So if you run your references through it, you can see how loud they are and then kind of try to match a similar loudness for your song. Another tool I like to use is tonal balance control. Listen to references and run them through the plugin and see what the curve looks like, and then kind of try to adjust your EQ and things to that. It's a nice visual way of figuring out what your track needs based on a reference. I think it's really good to have a balance of visual meters and also what you're hearing so that you can get the best master possible. All right, so as a bonus, for all of you who don't have the money to buy expensive plugins, I made a version of the master with just free plugins. This is what it sounds like.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time,
versus the expensive one.
If you take my time, gonna lose your mind. If I take your time, gonna lose.
And we can get some pretty similar results. To me, the expensive one sounds more high-end, and I think it's worth, if you're doing this professionally, putting the money into expensive plugins that make stuff sound really good. But you can get a pretty good result with just FL Studio stuff and free stuff. So I basically copied the same idea. I started with some saturation, had it on the low setting, and set it to where it's similarly not too distorted, but getting some nice saturation. This is a free plugin, so that's why I used it. Then I have an EQ to kind of shape what I was doing with the P42 climax thing, just adding a little bit of high end, and I took away a little bit of low end because it seemed like it balanced that way through that other plugin. Next I have a limiter, which I used actually just for the compression setting. So that was instead of the mastering compressor.
If you take
So I'm just doing a little bit of compression there, nothing that's really hitting too hard. Next, I copied the EQ that I did with Pro Q, took away some high end, a little bit of low mids, and chopped it off at 20 hertz. Then I got Maximus, which I'm both doing the width thing, so I took the width knob all the way down on the lows. On the mids, brought it up a little bit. The highs a little bit more. And a tiny bit on the full thing. So that's making it all wider. And then I did a little bit of compression / saturation. So when you bring the threshold down, saturating, this purple like kind of faded thing comes up. And then you can decide how low you want to set it. So that's kind of simulating my first maximizer that I had. And then I put a second Maximus to do the final limiting and chopping. So final maximizing. So as you can see, that's a mixture of compression, and this blue line here is where everything gets chopped off completely. So yeah, it got pretty loud if you listen. This one's maybe not quite as loud, but I could always push it up a little bit more with the pre-knob, which is before it goes into the compression and distortion. So honestly, it's not too bad. So you can do a lot with free plugins. If you want to dive more into the FL Studio plugins, go watch my first mastering video. It's outdated a bit with my style now and what I do now, but you can still learn some good stuff from it. So that's kind of how I master now in a nutshell. I do a little bit more than that or less than that with different tracks. It really depends, but this is kind of overview of what I'm doing right now. Just a reminder, mastering is extremely tedious and it takes such a long time to really grasp what you're doing and what you want to get out of it. So feel free to take a lot of time and a lot of practice before you feel super happy with what you're doing. Honestly, still, I really struggle to get what I want with my mastering, and I still struggle with it a bunch, and it takes me a while to get the master how I like it, and it's different for every song. So have patience with yourself. Luckily, we live in a time right now where you can have room to do things creatively how you want, and there's not a ton of pressure. So take that pressure off, take a deep breath, it's gonna be fine. Guys, please consider checking out my music on Spotify, Apple Music, or here on YouTube. I'm extremely excited about the project I'm doing right now. Lose Your Mind is the first single for my new album coming out. This has been in the works for a long time, and I'm super excited to do a full-length album. I hope you guys come along with me on this journey as I release songs and create this world and this picture for you guys to be a part of. If you're not already subscribed, dude, subscribe, it's not that hard. And that's all I got for this video. I'll see you later. Peace.